couple thousand years ago in history, well recorded and preserved, Jesus was born and taught things that raised a lot of eyebrows and was crucified and resurrected from the dead and gave a message to his followers to spread hope in him around the world. And thousands of years later, we are gathered in that same name of Jesus because our lives matter. He loves us. He died and resurrected so that we could have new life. There's a lot of stories in the room, and every single one of us, or if you're watching online, every single one of us, we've got a different, unique history in our own life. We've come to this room from different places, but it's wonderful to come together and remember that our little stories also have a big overarching story. We have one story together, a story of redemption, a story of hope, a story of promise in the future through Jesus Christ. That is something to get excited about. Anybody else with me? If you've been with us in this year so far, through the Lonely series, we really tried to build connection and deepen the relationships a little bit. And so if that has happened for you, I just want to encourage you to continue taking some of those steps. And if you still feel like I don't have quite the connection that I've wanted, I want to remind and encourage you some of the things we picked up in that series. Be proactive. Take a step outside of your comfort zone. Go to new places, meet new people, try new things to connect. And we'd always love to try to help make those connections as best as we can as a church. So if you want to look into making some group connections or finding a place to serve, please share it with us. We'd love to know that. If you're going through a dark and difficult time that you don't really feel like a lot of people know about, feel free to shoot us a note. We'd love to pray for you or encourage you because we really do have that overarching story. Last year, we started a series called The 10 Commandments, and we got to commandment number 3 and then hit pause. This year, we've picked up last week with commandment number 4. If you were here last week, you heard Ruben share about that in Spanish and English interpretation. Ruben is our Spanish minister, great guy, and they meet weekly in a different room in this building. And today we pick up with commandment number 5. Commandment number 5. Now, before we look deeply at this, I wonder if we could piece together all 10 of the commandments based on the wisdom of the room. Could we do that? So this is actually really important to know these and memorize them because what we hide in our heart and our mind tends to come out in time of need. The Spirit brings these things to mind, but it's helpful if we already have them in there, right? So let's see if we can do this together. First commandment. Raise your hand if you'd like to give it a stab at it.
Thou shalt have no other gods beside me.
Perfect. No other gods before me, no other gods beside me. Commandment number 2. Who wants to raise your hand if you give a stab at it? That is, the second commandment is idols, the idol one, no graven images. 3, now you can feel free to cheat. Get your phones out, get your Bibles out, get your old notes out. This is not a pop quiz. This is a bring your book to quiz. Number 3, you married, yeah. Don't use the Lord's name in vain. Yes, yeah, good. 4. Remember the Sabbath day, keeping it holy. Good. 5, today. Honor your mom. Honor your father and mother. 6. Yes, I was going to say, who wants to take a stab at that one? Number 7. Yes, do not commit adultery. 8. Don't steal. Good. Yeah, we're in just almost in unison now. 9. Don't bear false testimony. It was really funny this week. I was asking my son, we got on the idea of witness and trials, and I asked him if he remembered the 9th commandment. And he thought for a minute, he goes, don't bear false testimony. What? Don't bear false testimony. That's very close, son, very close. He had the idea. Don't bear false testimony, don't lie. What's number 10? Yeah, don't covet. These are so important, these commandments we talked about at the beginning. It's so important to keep in mind what the value of these commandments are for us, because this was to a group of people a long, long time ago in a culture far, far away. But boy, are these commands so relevant for us. If we remember what happened right before the Ten Commandments were given in Exodus 20, God had saved and rescued a whole people group out from being what? They were slaves. I mean, they were not just in a bad situation. They were full-fledged slaves for generations under very hard labor and very difficult circumstance. He rescues them out, and he's taking them to establish themselves in a freedom. Listen, freedom as a nation, freedom to worship him, freedom not to be slaves. But before he gave them that freedom, he gave them boundaries to that freedom, because before they were worried about stepping out of line and getting whacked by Pharaoh or one of the power structures in Egypt. Now God is telling them, listen, you're going to have freedom, but freedom has to come with a responsibility, because if you step out of line against my ways, life itself will be the tree that you smack against. Anybody ever experienced this when you were a kid? You were just afraid of getting caught. Well, somebody's going to find out. Somebody's going to punish me. Somebody's going to suspend me. Somebody's going to take away my toys or my freedoms. But when you become an adult, you realize I could get away with something for a long time. But life itself, the way that God has set up the world, is not going to let me go forever without having the consequence. The Ten Commandments are God's guardrails for our life to say, I want you to have freedom. I want you to drive. I want you to have a good and rich and wonderful life. But if you don't follow my ways, it's not that I'm just going to get angry. I'm not just a disciplinarian. Life will not work for you, people. Life will be a crash. If you plow through the guardrails, you'll hit the tree. And so these commandments give us such wisdom and guidance for life. And the amazing thing is we look at these thousands of years later and realize these are so applicable. If we followed this guidance as a family, as a church, as a nation, what trees we would avoid crashing into. Number 5, honor. Let's put up on the screen so we can see it. Honor your father and mother. Then you will live a long, full life in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. Honor your father and mother. Now, some of you in the room or watching online, you would say, man, I've had great parents. That's easy to do. Others would say, my relationship with my parents is much more difficult. And others of you are thinking of this from the rearview mirror because your parents are no longer living, but it still applies. Here's a little bit of the setting that we find ourselves in. I want to share some of the setting. And when I say this, I think you'll intuitively go, yeah, that makes sense. I see that. I see a lot of examples of that because the setting influences the way we hear the commandment as a culture. The setting that we are in right now is a setting where increasingly there is a perspective and a mindset that authority is not to be trusted. There's a lens that is more and more popular these days that says if you have power and authority of any kind, you probably stole it from somebody unjustly and you're probably abusing or misusing or oppressing the people who you have authority over. If that's the mindset, then the solution to that is, well, what do we do? And what do we do when we encounter people who have power or authority over other people? Well, we need to just take power from them because I'm sure they got it in a way that was wrong. They shouldn't have it, and they shouldn't have it over me in any way. And so what do we do? If that's the mindset, the solution is we take power from people who have it and we just sort of disperse the idea of power altogether. Or maybe a little more difficult version is I'll just take it and put you under my thumb this time. See how you like it if you have power. Now this permeates so many institutions where there are power. And by that I mean things like government officials. It's to a point where this perspective is becoming so pervasive that people look at any elected official or anyone who has power and just assume corruption. Am I wrong? It's not all the time, but boy, it's on the rise. There's an assumption that, boy, if you're opening your mouth, it's probably not true. If you're from a position or a seat of authority and you're opening your mouth, you're probably lying or spinning. Now, don't get me wrong. There are lots of examples and reasons that have caused mistrust. But it doesn't mean dethrone any elected official. Law enforcement, another great example. Wow, if you're enforcing the law, if you have power to enforce the law of the land, you must be misusing that inherently. If you have power over other people, you're certainly using it in an unjust way. Now, don't get me wrong. There are numerous examples of those who have misused that power, and it's wrong. But to take away the idea itself and say we just don't need that kind of thing in the world is a road toward problems. Administrators, school teachers. Well, you're not looking out for the best interest of my kid. Well, you're probably just in it for your own interest here of the school and the numbers and the grading and the testing, and you're not paying attention to the needs of the people. That's now becoming more of a default. Yeah, pastors, clergy, priests, we know the corruption there. Just wait, something dark will come out about everybody eventually. Boss, my supervisor, my CEO, oh yeah, like they're just sitting at the top, and all the grunts are doing everything else for them. I mean, might as well just put their feet on my head because they're up there. I'm sure they got there by some way that wasn't fair or honest or right, or they're probably hiding something or taking advantage of the system or enjoying too many perks at everybody else's expense. And this lens has extended all the way to the family unit. Parents, what do they know? Grandparents, get with it. Don't try to impose your this and that and your perspective on me. I'm my own person. If the lens, now again, sometimes this is exactly what's happening, and it needs to be addressed and corrected, and justice needs to be brought to people who are misusing power. Don't get me wrong, but if that is the lens through which we see any position of authority, and the solution then is to take the power and give it somewhere else, or give it to me because I don't like you having it over me, then we are getting ourselves into trouble as a society, and this is showing up at the basic fabric of society in the home. The problem with this kind of lens is that, first of all, just play it out one more iteration or one more generation, and what have you done? You've just given authority to somebody else. And there's no basis for that authority to be valid anymore. God has put on purpose, this is a challenging message of the Bible for our culture because we don't want to hear it. God has put authority into society for good reason. And the call to honor those in authority is almost like nails on a chalkboard to a nation who just wants perpetual revolution. Let me read to you Romans 13. Just one verse, 13:1. Everyone must submit to governing authorities, for all authority comes from God, and those in positions of authority have been placed there by God. Frame of reference, Paul's writing this to the Romans. And if you think about being a Christian in Rome, you feel the immediate tension of authority. Gosh. And Paul himself actually finished his days under this kind of authority prematurely. But yet, this is the message that, where did he get this idea from? It's like, where did he come up with this stuff? Oh, Jesus. Jesus taught this. Jesus stands before Pilate, and instead of stepping up above Pilate, because Jesus is, after all, the king of all kings, he was largely silent, and he said, you have authority, but it's just from God. If it wasn't for God, you wouldn't have any authority. He recognized the role that God gives. In fact, look throughout the scripture, and God is eager to put people in charge of things. He wants to give power and authority, but he wants people to use it in the ways that it was intended. It's necessary for families that not everyone in the house has an equal vote. Could you imagine? If you had a mom, dad, a 16-year-old, a 13-year-old, an 11-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 4-year-old in the home, and they all got an equal vote on every decision? Whoa, I think we can see the guardrail here. Could you imagine a classroom where the teacher didn't have any more authority than any of the students? Could you imagine a nation where there was no sense of guidance or governance? It's necessary for the purpose of function in the home and everywhere else. And why are we talking about all these other structures? It's basically because respect for all authority starts when you're a kid, and it starts in the home. It starts with honoring our parents. Tim Keller said this: it's respect for your parents that is the basis for every other kind of respect and every other kind of authority. Let me give you an example. Let's say you were on a hiring team and you were about to hire a new employee, and there were a bunch of employees out in the lobby waiting to come in for an interview one after another, and you happened to walk by and you heard one of the candidates on the phone, and he goes, "Hey, Dad, no, I can't talk to you right now. I'm about to go in for an interview." And you overheard this phone call, and in the course of the conversation, the candidate was really rude to his dad, ended up saying harsh things to him and like chewing him out and being critical of him, and then hung up on him. And then he comes in for an interview. Now, how are you thinking about this person already? If they're treating their parents like this, what does that say about how they're going to work as a team in a job? Positive or negative? That's a bad start. Because we intuitively know that the way that we honor our father and mother is the basis for every other kind of honor in society. Let's use a different example. Let's say you were dating somebody who you'd never met their parents, and let's just pretend you're a female if you're not a female, and you're dating this guy, and they go home, and all of a sudden he starts treating his mom terribly, cussing her out when she makes a mistake, being harsh and critical, saying, "Why don't you get this? Why don't you do this?" Is your value of that person going up or down? Are you more likely to commit your life to a person like that? Well, they treat you great, but they treat their mom like crap. What does that tell you about how they may eventually treat you? The way that we treat our parents, the way that we honor them, is a good indication of the way we honor authority in general. This part of the commandment actually has a part 1, which is the command, and part 2, which is the promise. It says, so that you may live a long and prosperous or long and happy, abundant life in the land that God is giving you. There are elements of that that are a promise, but there are also elements of that that are just common sense. Think about how quickly kids would perish if they didn't obey their parents, if they didn't have regard for listening to the wisdom of parents and grandparents. Look both ways before you cross the street. Eat your vegetables. Don't hang out with those friends. Stay away from drugs. On and on and on it goes. Honoring parents is like a safeguard to learning wisdom, not the hard way. One of the things I did with my dad growing up was go hunting. And he taught me how to hunt, but part of the prerequisite of that is teaching me how to use a gun. Anybody ever had those kinds of instructions from home? Like, there's ways you use a gun, and there are things you'd never, ever do. Think about living a long and happy, prosperous life. That's very literal in some cases. You don't listen to dad when it comes to gun training, and somebody could not live a long or prosperous life really quickly. God embeds the power and authority in parents as a first round of teaching kids honor and respect for authority, humility, submission, obedience, all those words that almost immediately get reaction from the lens of revolutionary minds. But let me talk for just a moment in the way of application. First, to parents and authorities. 3 things that we can do if you have any sort of parental or authority or grandparent authority. And then for those who are children, which is everyone else. Everyone is a child, adult, son or daughter. So 3 things if you have any form of parental authority over anyone. And the first one is this: use your power to serve. Use your power to serve others. God gave it to you. He could certainly take it away, and he gave it to us for a reason. He loves giving us power to serve. Listen to Ephesians 6:2. It says, it reiterates the commandment, honor your father and mother. This is the first command with a promise. If you honor your father and mother, things will go well for you, and you will have a long life on earth, the NLT says. And then the other side of the coin is highlighted. Fathers, parents, don't provoke your children to anger by the way that you treat them. Rather, bring them up in the discipline and instruction that comes from the Lord. There is a responsibility not only for children and grandchildren, but for parents and grandparents. And here it is in a nutshell. Treat them like God would treat them. Imitate God the Father. Discipline and instruction of the Lord. In other words, we could just put ourselves in a scenario and say, gosh, if Jesus were the parent at this very moment, what would he say to my kid? If Jesus were the grandparent and this just happened, how would he react? What would his facial expression have shown in this very moment? That's what I want to do, because that's why God gave me the authority to be a parent or grandparent. At this very moment, how would Jesus react? Luke 22 says, Jesus told them, in this world, kings and great men lord it over their people, yet they are called friends of the people. But among you, it will be different. Those who are the greatest among you should take the lowest rank, and the leader should be like a what? If we have any form of parental power, home, and authority, it's not to be abdicated. It actually needs to be exerted for the benefit of the child or grandchild. There needs to be discipline in the home. There needs to be teaching. There needs to be right and wrong. There needs to be guidance, but it has to be done from a heart of serving other people. The second one is to model it. Model it. Honestly, I feel like going through my own parenting journey and talking with other parents of young kids and kids of all ages, one of the best pieces of advice I've seen is to start focusing more on yourself. Let me explain. Start focusing more on yourself than the behavior change you expect in your kid. If you're upset at your child for not listening, model listening. If you're upset at your grandchild for yelling, don't yell at them for it. In other words, if we model it, we've already got a heads up. People, especially people with a lens of revolutionary mindset, they smell disharmony, disintegrity from a mile away. As far as a shark smells blood in the water, people can spot hypocrisy. Man, you're saying one thing in your seat of authority, but you're doing it differently. And it doesn't take a huge discrepancy for people to pick up. You're not practicing what you preach. I see the way you treated Mom, Dad. I see the way you interacted with the store person who wasn't kind to you, and that yet you tell me to always have respect for people. I see the shadiness on the backside of your life because I see your whole life because we're in the same house. You don't get to hide that. John Locke said this: parents wonder why the streams are bitter when they themselves have poisoned the water. Our influence and what we model says more than our words. And the third one is this: This is a great concept to keep in mind. The way that you treat your parents is likely the way that your children will treat you at that stage. Isn't that an interesting circular thought to realize? And the way that I treat my parents is likely the way, if I'm harsh, critical, no mercy, no forgiveness, resentment, bitterness, cutting off, distancing, every mistake gets highlighted, what am I teaching my kids to treat me as I age? And when I make mistakes, and believe me, it happens. How have I taught them to expect their parents to be, but more importantly, how are they going to react on instinct? Without mercy, without forgiveness, without second chance, without reconciliation. Euripides, the ancient philosopher, said, "Unblessed is the son who does not honor his parents. But if reverent and obedient to them, he will receive the same from his own children." To children, here are a few ways that we can honor our parents. I don't love the English word child because it doesn't give the nuance that some other languages have. Child we think of as young, but son and daughter is a better word. It's a child of any age. We're adult children. You're an adult son or daughter. How many of you in the room have parents? Living or past? How many of you have had parents? Okay, so I think that's pretty much 100%. So this applies to all of us. And the first application in honoring our parents, this is so simple you're going to say, well, gee, I could have thought of that. But it's one of the most profoundly important is the way that we speak about our parents. The way that we speak about our parents is one of the greatest ways we can honor them, and one of the quickest and most common ways that we dishonor them is the way that we speak about them. Sometimes it's speaking to them, but often it's speaking about them. Even if they're deceased, we carry on their legacy and memory in the way that we speak about them. And to be able to say things, maybe there was a lot of hurt or harm, maybe some even abuse in your relationship with your parents, and that doesn't need to be blindly overlooked. It needs to be addressed. I'm not talking about just submitting under abuse. That needs to be dealt with. But even once we deal with that, God does not teach us to come back in and leverage revenge in the ways that we talk about our parents. He teaches us to speak honor, find the good, lift that up. A second specific example in children is there may be times when honoring your father and mother means first honoring God and disobeying your parents. You ever had that situation in life? Some people have. Some people have parents who wanted nothing to do with anything of faith. They'd make fun of their kids for following Jesus, for going to church, for making good decisions. And in that sense, honoring parents looks first like honoring God, even while respecting your parents and doing something else. If your parents are making a lot of money on a business venture that is really corrupt and unjust and unethical, and they want you to jump in and take part of it, honoring your parents is to do what God wants and not do that. If your parents made a legacy that you don't want to live out, honor God first and honor them in the way that you respect them. I did a TikTok post this week that was about a 60-second talk about honoring your parents in preparation for this one, and somebody I never met commented on it and said, this kind of thinking just promotes abuse. It promotes people to stay in abusive situations with authority. And I just went, gee, that's that lens of the revolutionary mindset. Just any sort of language of submission, any sort of talk about honoring people in authority, even if they don't deserve honor in the way they act, it's just translated and misinterpreted as something that it was never intended to be. There are times when we have to follow God and defy the person that is supposed to be doing good by doing what God wants. But still, even then, with a spirit and a heart of honoring them. And lastly, I just want to speak for a moment to children, adult sons and daughters with elderly or health-failing parents. This is one of those interesting reversals in life as well, isn't it? Where there are certain stages in life where parents' health are failing and that the child almost becomes the parental figure. And I've had the opportunity to look on and see this done really, really well and see it done really, really roughly. And my encouragement to you again is to continue to honor them, even if they're not acting honorably. Keep honoring them. Even if you disagree, you might have to make decisions they don't like. But keep that culture, that spirit, that heart of honor, because that's about what you decide to do, who you decide to be. And keep speaking highly of them, lifting them up, even if there's private conflicts. Lift them up and make their life good. I see people as they're failing in health and their mind is failing and their body is failing and children are wrestling with all the decisions of what that means to now parent their parents in some ways. And I just think of it like pulling a blanket of grace over them. Just pull a blanket of grace over them because they're going to make a lot of mistakes, especially if mind and health fail. It's not even fully them that are making the mistakes. Pull a blanket of grace. That's a big blanket God has given you. They've given you so much grace. If we could rewind the clock when you were pooping your diaper and they were changing it, they pulled that blanket of grace over you. When you were having terrible 2s and terrible 3s and throwing a toddler fit in the mall, they pulled a blanket of grace over you and they kept loving you. Let's do that for our parents and our grandparents. I want to close today with just about 1 minute of reflection. And we can put a slide up now. I want to highlight this for just a minute. To take a moment today to reflect and interact with what we're talking about, think about the question, what stood out to you most today from this talk and specifically this scripture about honoring your parents? If you would like to feedback a comment or question on this, you can do that right now through the app. Even if you don't have the app, you can download it real quick. And then at the bottom, you'll see a section that says message questions that's highlighted. I circled it in red. You can take that moment. If you want to discuss what stood out to you with somebody sitting beside you, great, do that. If you'd rather just interact with that and shoot a question or comment, do that. But we'll take about 1 minute. Feel free to turn to somebody around you, talk to them. What idea are you taking home with and applying today? Or feel free to text that in.